This is Roverandom Section 2. Please listen and read along so you can do the quiz afterwards. Now fly off and amuse yourself. Don't worry the moonbeams and don't kill my white rabbits, and come home when you are hungry. The window on the roof is usually open. Goodbye. Right. Amuse here. If you know what that means to entertain yourself, to make yourself happy. Who is talking here? This is, of course, the man in the moon talking to Rover and, Roverandom, as he's been renamed, and of course, the Rover, which is the moon dog. So there's the two dogs right now, and they're on the moon. He vanished immediately into thin air, and anybody who has never been there will tell you how extremely thin moon air is. Well, goodbye, Roverandom, said Mew. I hope you enjoy making trouble among the wizards. Farewell for the present. Don't kill the white rabbits, and all will yet be well, and you will get home safe, whether you want to or not. So vanished, of course, synonym for vanished is disappear. And when they say he here, that means the man in the moon, who of course is a wizard, so he has the ability to vanish, right? Because they have spells and things. And then here we have Mew talking, and he is of course the seagull that brought Roverandom, or previously known as Rover, to the moon. Okay, so he's saying goodbye. Then Mew flew off at such pace that before you could say whiz, he was a dot in the sky, and then he had vanished. Rover was now not only turned into toy size, but his name had been altered, and he was left all alone on the moon. All alone except for the man in the moon and his dog. Okay. Altered here means to change, right? And so Rover's name has been changed to Roverandom because there's another dog called Rover, who is the man in the moon's dog, so they want to keep the confusion down. All right, let's move on there. Roverandom, as we had better call him too, for the present, to avoid confusion, didn't mind. His new wings were great fun, and the moon turned out to be a remarkably interesting place, so that he forgot to ponder any more why Pisothamos had sent him there. It was a long time before he found out. So ponder here, of course, means to kind of wonder, to think over something, kind of like a puzzle. And Pisothamos is the sand sorcerer, of course, who found Roverandom as a toy on the beach and helped him, and then sent him to the moon. In the meanwhile, he had all sorts of adventures by himself and with the moon rover. Okay, so the moon rover there is the dog that belongs to the man in the moon. He didn't often fly about in the air far from the tower, for in the moon, and especially on the white side, the insects are very large and fierce, and often so pale and so transparent and so silent that you hardly hear or see them coming. Right, so transparent means you can see them, you can see through it, kind of like glass, right? Okay. The moonbeams only shine and flutter, and Roverandom was not frightened of them. The big white dragon moths with fiery eyes were much more alarming, and there were sword flies and glass beetles with jaws like steel traps, and pale unicornets with stings like spears, and 57 varieties of spiders ready to eat anything they could catch. And worse than the insects were the shadow bats. Okay, so he's quite afraid of these giant insects, as he would be. Interesting one here. The unicornets is a mix between unicorn and hornets, right? Hornet being a stinging flying insect. So that does kind of sound terrifying, especially these giant insects on the moon. Roverandom did what the birds do on that side of the moon. He flew very little except near at home, or in open spaces with a good view all around, and far from insect hiding places. And he walked about very quietly, especially in the woods. Most things there went about very quietly, and the birds seldom even twittered. What sounds there were made chiefly by the plants. Okay, so he's in the forest, he's trying not to get eaten by insects. Chiefly here means mostly, right? So the sound, so everything, so the animals and the creatures are all quiet in the forest because they don't want to get eaten by giant insects. And the giant insects are also quiet. So the only thing making sound is the plants. The flowers, the white bells, the fair bells, and the silver bells, and the tinker bells, the ring o' roses, the rhyme royals, and the penny whistles, the tin trumpets, and the cream horns, a very pale cream, and many others were with untranslatable names, made tunes all day long, and the feather grasses and the ferns, fairy fiddlestrings, polyphonies, and brass tongues, and the kraken in the woods, and all the reeds by the milk-white ponds, they kept up the music, softly even in the night. In fact, there was always a faint, thin music going on. So what he's describing here is a bunch of different kinds of flowers and plants that are all making noises, especially like something like bells. There are a lot of plants that are called bells, but because they look like bells. But obviously these ones on the moon not only look like bells, but they make the the sound of bells as well. And here you can see something like fiddle strings, right? A fiddle is a is a violin. So these plants are all making some music. But the birds were silent and very tiny, most of them were, hopping about in the gray grass beneath the trees, dodging the flies and the swooping flutterbys, and many of them had lost their wings or forgotten how to use them. Roverandom used to startle them in their little ground nests as he stalked quietly through the pale grass, hunting the little white mice or snuffing after the gray squirrels on the edges of the woods. So flutterbys here is kind of fun. It's called a spoonerism. That's when they take the letters from one part of the word and they mix it with letters from another part. So they mix the FL with the B there. Butterflies becomes flutterbys. Okay. They say here that the birds are silent. Why are they silent? Well, because they're giant insects and these birds are tiny. It says here they're dodging the flies, right? So because the flies, even the flies are bigger than the birds, right? So they don't want to be heard by the animals. Startle, Roverandom used to startle them. The them is the birds. Startle means to scare, right? To surprise. And then stalked, of course, is to quietly follow and creep up on someone. The woods were filled with silver bells, all ringing softly together when he first saw them. The tall black trunks stood up straight, high as churches, out of the silver carpet, and they were roofed with pale blue leaves that never fell, so that not even the longest telescope on earth has ever seen those tall trunks or the silver bells beneath them. Later in the year, the trees all burst together into pale golden blossoms, and since the woods of the moon are nearly endless, no doubt that alters the look of the moon from below on the world. Okay, so they talk about the silver bells here again. The silver bells are kind of flower making some noise. And then it says the tall black trunks. Now he's in the woods. The woods is a forest. So trunk can mean many things, but it has to be the stem of a tree. It cannot be the nose of an elephant here because that's not what they're mentioning. And it cannot also be like a big chest or box. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to be trunk as in tree trunks. They say high as churches, which of course is a simile, which is a comparison. So he's comparing the trunks of the trees to churches. There are no churches. He's just saying they're like it. So there's a simile there. Out of the silver carpet is a metaphor because he's saying the gray grass, the silver grass, kind of looks like a carpet. So that's a metaphor there. And they were roofed with pale blue leaves. Pale means like lightly colored, that never fell, so that not even the longest telescope on Earth has ever seen it. So what they're basically saying here, and they have like the pale golden blossoms, is that from Earth, it just looks, you can't see the trees, it just kind of looks bluish, like a light blue color, kind of like the moon looks at some nights. And when it has golden blossoms, light colored gold, that's when the moon looks yellow or orange, right? So they're kind of saying that these trees, flowers, and leaves make it look the way we see the moon. You have to understand that this book was written a very long time ago, probably before people went to the moon. So this kind of fantasy moon is a little bit different there. Alters again there means to change. So it says, no doubt that alters, so it changes how the moon looks from below on the world. Okay. But you must not imagine that all Roverandom's time was spent creeping about like that. After all, the dogs knew that the man's eye was on them, and they did a good many adventurous things and had a great deal of fun. Sometimes they wandered off together for miles and miles and forgot to go back to the tower for days. Once or twice they went up into the mountains far away, till looking back they could see the moon tower only as a shining needle in the distance. Okay, so the man here is the man in the moon, right? And he's eye. Now he has two eyes, but they say eye because he's looking through a telescope, right? And you can only have one eye through a telescope. And then they say sometimes they wandered off. Wandered, not with an O, but with an A, means to travel but not to really care where you're going. You're just traveling. And then down here it says they could see the moon tower as a shining needle now in the distance. So a needle because it looks so far away. They've gone very, very far away. So that's kind of how they're illustrating that. Okay. And they sat on the white rocks and watched the tiny sheep, no bigger than the man in the moon's rover, wandering in herds over the hillsides. Every sheep carried a golden bell, and every bell rang each time each sheep moved a foot forward to get a fresh mouthful. And all the bells rang in tune. So what they mean here is the bells that the sheep have on, and all the sheep shone like snow. Shone like snow there is a simile, right? And no one ever worried them. The rovers were much too well brought up, and afraid of the man, to do so, and there were no other dogs in all the moon, nor cows, nor horses, nor lions, nor tigers, nor wolves, in fact nothing larger on 4 feet than rabbits and squirrels, and toy-sized at that. So it says here, no one ever worried the sheep. They don't mean worried. This is an old way of using worried, like kind of like bothered, right? No one bothered the sheep. And then down here they said there's nothing big on 4 feet. It's really important that he uses that because does that mean everything on the moon is small? No, because the insects don't have 4 feet and the spiders don't have 4 feet and they're giant, right? But the four-legged animals are quite small. Okay. Except just occasionally to be seen standing solemnly in thought an enormous white elephant, almost as big as a donkey. I haven't mentioned the dragons because they don't come into the story just yet. And anyway, they lived a very long way off, far from the tower, being all very afraid of the man in the moon, except one, and even he was afraid. Okay, occasionally, meaning not often, just rarely, and then solemnly means kind of like seriously, like with a serious, deep look on your face there. Okay. Whenever the dogs did go back to the tower and fly in at the window, they always found their dinner just ready, as if they had arranged the time. But they seldom saw or heard the man about. He had a workshop down in the cellars, and clouds of white steam and grey mist used to come up the stairs and float away out of the upper windows. Okay. Seldom means the same as occasionally, right? Seldom means like not often, and then here, cellars, right? Cellars means like a basement. Okay, so he's doing something in the basement of the tower, and there's clouds coming out of it, right? What does he do with himself all day? Said Roverandom to Rover. Do? Said the moondog. Oh, he's always pretty busy, though he seems busier than I have seen him for a long time, since you arrived. Making dreams, I believe. What does he make dreams for? Oh, for the other side of the moon. No one has dreams on this side. The dreamers all go round to the back. Roverandom sat down and scratched. He didn't think the explanation explained. The moondog would not tell him any more, all the same, and if you ask me, I don't think he knew much about it. However, something happened soon after that put such questions out of Roverandom's mind altogether for a while. The two dogs went and had a very exciting adventure, much too exciting while it lasted. But that was their own fault. They went away for several days, much farther than they had ever been before since Roverandom came, and they did not bother to think where they were going. In fact, they went and lost themselves, and mistaking the way, got farther and farther from the tower. When they thought they were getting back, the moon dog said he had roamed all over the white side of the moon, and knew it all by heart. He was very apt to exaggerate, but eventually he had to admit that the country seemed a bit strange. Okay, apt here means like skilled, like he's very good at it. Exaggerate, of course, means to make something bigger than it really is, right? Like you're saying, like, oh, I'm so hungry I could eat a whole cow, right? It's like a hyperbole. And then it says here, he knew it all by heart. All by heart, of course, is an idiom that is using there, which means he knows it very well, right? And by country there, they don't mean like country as we know. By country, that's kind of like a British way of saying countryside, like just like the hills, the land, not necessarily a country as in South Africa or America. Okay. I'm afraid it's a very long time since I came here, he said, and I'm beginning to forget it a bit. As a matter of fact, he had never been there before at all. Unawares, they had wandered too near to the shadowy edge of the dark side, where all sorts of half-forgotten things linger and paths and memories get confused. Linger means kind of just like to wait, to be there, to kind of secretly live. It's kind of linger. Um, and you can see here that they use wander again, and they say the dark side. Now, what they mean is there's two sides to the moon. There's the dark side, and there is the light side. The light side is the one that gets the sun, and the other side is very dark, right? Where the sun doesn't shine. And it's the same as the Earth, basically. Just when they felt sure that at last they were on the right way home, they were surprised to find some tall mountains rising before them, silent, bare, and ominous. And, and these the moondog made no pretense of ever having seen before. They were gray, not white, and looked as if they were made of old, cold ashes, and long, dim valleys lay among them without a sign of life. So bare here, so you have to imagine this, it's a mountain, bare meaning like it has nothing on it, like naked. And what they mean by that is there's no trees, there's no plants, there's nothing on it. It's just this gray, like just this mountain with nothing on it. Um, Ominous here means like not really scary, but something that's like that you feel is not right. It's kind of dark and big and a little bit scary. It makes you feel uneasy. Okay. Then it says the moondog made no pretense. Pretense is the noun of pretend, like he because he was pretending earlier that he knew all everywhere around the moon, but of course he didn't. So now he's like, nope, he's not going to pretend anymore. He doesn't know where they are. Um, and then it says long dim valley. Dim is a synonym for dark, so it's a dark valley. So you have to imagine these mountains, and then in between the mountains are these dark valleys that are about them. Then it began to snow. It often does snow in the moon, but the snow, as they call it, is usually nice and warm and quite dry and turns into fine white sand and all blows away. This was more like our sort. It was wet and cold, and it was dirty. It makes me homesick, said the moondog. It's just like the stuff that used to fall in the town when I was a puppy, on the world, you know. Oh, the chimneys there, tall as moon trees, and the black smoke and the red furnace fires. I get a bit tired of white at times. It's very difficult to get really dirty on the moon. So the moondog is talking about being homesick for chimneys and black smoke. Um, so what you have to understand here is that the moondog is not really, he left Earth a very long time ago when it was still the time of like, factories with coal and that is the kind of thing, the Industrial Revolution of like 100, 200 years ago. So he must have left Earth quite a long time ago. This rather shows up the moon's low tastes, and as there were no such towns on the world hundreds of years ago, you can also see that he had exaggerated the length of time since he fell over the edge a very great deal too. However, just at that moment, a especially large and dirty flake hit him in the left eye, and he changed his mind. Okay, so this here shows up, meaning like reveals, to show. Um, I think this stuff has missed its way and fallen off the beastly old world, he said. Rat and rabbit it. And we seem to have missed our way altogether, too. Bet and bother it, let's find a hole to creep in. It took some time to find a hole of any sort, and they were very wet and cold before they did. In fact, so miserable that they took the first shelter they came to, and no precautions. So shelter means like a safe place, and precautions means to protect yourself before you do something, right? Like for example, if you're going to play cricket, you wear a helmet and pads, right? That's a precaution. It's not that you're going to get hit by the ball, but you prepare for the danger that you know is coming. So they took no precautions. So he's saying and here he says rat and rabbit it. I think that's just kind of like dog swearing, right? Like it's like darn it and bet and bother it. Like, and of course there's a little bit of alliteration here, rat and rabbit and bat and bother. And he's using the same consonant there for bat and bother, and for rat and rabbit. So they're just frustrated. So they're cold. They don't want the snow that's coming from Earth to the moon, and they want to find a nice hole to hide in. Precautions, which are the first thing you ought to take in unfamiliar places on the edge of the moon. The shelter they crawled into was not a hole, but a cave, and a very large cave too. It was dark, but it was dry. This is nice and warm, said the moon dog, and he closed his eyes and went off into a doze almost immediately. Okay, unfamiliar means you don't know it, right? It's an unfamiliar place, so they don't know this place, right? They've never been here before. And then the dog goes off in a doze, right? That's like a nap, right? Like he's fallen asleep. Okay. Ow, he yelped not long afterwards, waking straight up, dog fashion, out of a comfortable dream, much too warm. He jumped up. He could hear little Roverandom barking away further inside the cave, and when he went to see what was up, he saw a trickle of fire creeping along the floor towards them. He did not feel homesick for red furnaces just then, and he seized little Roverandom by the back of his little neck and bolted out of the cave as quick as lightning and flew up to a peak of stone just outside. Okay, so a trickle of fire here is like a small little line of fire. It's not a lot. Bolted means to run out quickly, usually to run away. There the two sat in the snow, shivering and watching, which was very silly of them. They ought to have flown off home, or anywhere, faster than the wind. The moon dog did not know everything about the moon, as you see, or he would have known that this was the lair of the great white dragon, the one that was only half afraid of the man, and scarcely that when he was angry. So lair here means like kind of the place where a big animal sleeps, a lair. Okay. Sometimes you say like bad guys in movies have a lair as well. It's usually like where something bad is resting. And scarcely means very little, like almost not. Okay. The man here, of course, is the man in the moon. So they're like when he's angry, he's almost not afraid of the man there. Right. So we're going to stop there. In this section. You can read it on your own as well. You can turn off the sound and you can just read it. And then you can do the questions. All right.